guns. Mao took the guns. Fidel Castro took the guns. Hugo Chavez took the guns. And I'm here to tell you, 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
Alex Jones. You know, in a way I have him to thank for turning me into the cynic I am today. His Bohemian Grove video gave me the fact-checking bug that later expanded to other subjects like Jordan Maxwell, medieval history, and church history.
Come back here, so that I may train thee!
Fast forward 3 years, and my modest studies resulted in the History Versus series back in 2011. So, in a way, I guess this video is kinda like getting back to my roots. I've had to pull the box of notes out from under my bed, blow off the dust, and get reacquainted with my first true love.
I'm a Nelly!
Okay, that was a terrible analogy. Let's do this.
Hello, I'm Alex Jones, and I'm a radio and television host based in Austin, Texas. And for many years, I've been exposing the criminal activities of the global elite, also known as the New World Order. Now, I personally am a Christian, but even an atheist should be concerned about the information we're about to bring forward in this new documentary film, The Dark Secrets Inside Bohemian Grove. You see, for over 120 plus years in Northern California, in Sonoma County, on a 2,700-acre secluded redwood grove, leaders from around the world, prime ministers, chancellors, presidents, governors, again, the heads of industry, banking, academia, the media, Hollywood, only a select few, a little over 2,000 people, travel there to engage in bizarre, ancient Canaanite, Luciferian, Babylon mystery religion ceremonies. At least that was the rumors.
Ah yes, the rumors. See, for several decades there was growing concern that the elites were secretly gathering at the Bohemian Grove not only to get wasted and hold closed meetings on domestic policy, but to perform satanic rituals and produce snuff films beneath the redwood trees. And although several news stories were written about the Grove during the 80s and early 90s, they didn't do anything to satisfy the detractors because none of those reports could show what was actually going on. Then in 1993, a small newspaper called the Santa Rosa Sun printed a story by a man named Mark Evans that tied the Bohemian Owl to the biblical account of Moloch, giving all of those rumors the face of a Canaanite god of child sacrifice. Yeah, as you can imagine, that stoked the flames of paranoia even higher. However, Alex's secret video changed all that. Instead of only having rumors to rely on, we could now see what was happening during the cremation of Care with our own eyes. And what the video showed us was that the rumors were unfounded, and that the mainstream media's previous reporting on the ceremony had been accurate. There were no chants to Moloch, no human sacrifices, none of that stuff. The ceremony was performed precisely the way we had been told it did, and the video did not reveal anything new about the ceremony that hadn't already been reported in newspapers, magazines, books, and TV broadcasts over the last 30 years. Not that this changed the minds of most skeptics. I'm sure they now see the cremation ceremony as more of a gateway drug, so to speak. An initiation that will eventually lead a few lucky bohemians to the real satanic blood sacrifices performed somewhere higher up the food chain.
Wasn't meant to happen like that, Waynesy!
Walk it off, big guy!
My documentary film, Dark Secrets Inside Bohemian Grove, details how world leaders from across the planet meet every July and actually engage in mock human sacrifices to the Canaanite deity Moloch. They bring a bound body in an effigy of a child and sacrifice it to the idol.
Okay, first of all, the whole Moloch idea is the invention of Mark Evans, who wrote the Santa Rosa Sun article I mentioned earlier. The Bohemians have never identified their owl as Moloch, not even in private. This is a name that outsiders have given the owl statue. Now, although Jones is quick to throw the Moloch name around, his cameraman, Mike Hansen, wrote a comprehensive book on the Bohemian Club called The Cult of Conspiracy, and on page 70, even he ruled out the Bohemian owl as a statue of Moloch, believing the Greek goddess Athena was a better fit. And on page 66, he said Tex Mars, who helped Jones in his research, connected the Bohemian owl to Ishtar instead of the Canaanite god of sacrifice. Second, in reality, the cremation of care is a mock exorcism, not a mock human sacrifice. According to the transcript, Dull Care is slain by the power of the Bohemians' fellowship prior to the ceremony. The cremation altar is a funeral pyre for the corpse of Care, and burning the corpse serves to banish his spirit from the grove for a period of time. So based on what the ceremony says, and not on what some people want it to say, the cremation of Dull Care is meant to exorcise his meddlesome spirit from the grove, until the midsummer festivities are over, when he will once again seek to destroy the Bohemians throughout the year. The club will say it's just a time-honored tradition to usher in the festivities. Detractors will say the Bohemians are banishing empathy. Whichever side you fall on, neither one has anything to do with human sacrifice. Look, it's not like this is something unique. The Czechs burn witch effigies on April 30th to destroy evil spirits and bring good luck. In Denmark, they burn witch effigies to celebrate midsummer. In Spain, they burn effigies or dolls as a part of their own midsummer festivities. In fact, most countries in Europe celebrate some sort of midsummer bonfire tradition in which effigies or wreaths or herbs are burned in order to banish evil spirits or bring good luck. Or at least that was their original meaning, and now they do it because it's a time-honored tradition and it's a good excuse to party. They are not burning effigies because they are closet Satanists, or because they're performing mock human sacrifices. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if the original Bohemians came up with the cremation of care based in part on the midsummer traditions already established in Europe. Even the phrase "begone dull care," which is used in the Bohemian ceremony, comes from a 17th century European poem, not some Babylonian spellbook. But I'm sure all of that is lost on Alex Jones, because to him, any practice that isn't rooted in the Judeo-Christian religion is either Babylonian or Luciferian. Lastly, Jones may have claimed the burnt effigy represented a child back in 2000, but in 2004, a Grove employee known only as Kyle sent Alex additional footage of the encampment, and part of the footage showed the interior of the owl statue as well as the various effigies used during the ceremony. And as you can see, none of the effigies have the dimensions of children. They are all adult-sized. Once again, video evidence has served to dispel the rumors and speculation.
The Canaanite deity Moloch was worshipped in Greece, Babylon, and then later in Europe. It is normally symbolized by a bull or an owl or some type of horned beast, and children are sacrificed to it.
I haven't been the first to point this out, and I'm sure I won't be the last, but we don't have any examples of Moloch being symbolized by an owl, and there are no ancient examples of his association with owl imagery. Quite simply, there is no historical precedent for any of it. Even the bull imagery of Moloch is more the product of 19th century folklore than anything else. There is still very little we know at this point about Canaanite religious cosmology, so it's a bit ridiculous when people like Alex or Tex Mars speak so authoritatively about a field of study that experts would admit is still very much in its infancy. Oh, and speaking of Tex Mars,
it's important to understand that we did massive research on the occult. And one of the libraries we visited was that of Professor Tex Mars of Aeronautics. He also has written literally dozens of books on the occult.
Yeah, at the time Alex Jones made his Dark Secrets video, Tex Mars had written roughly 17 books on the occult, not dozens. All but 2 were self-published and had no scholarly accreditation. Before 1987, Mars wrote books about naming pets, careers in computers, military service, and robotics technology in the mid-1980s. And then, kablam, he suddenly emerged as an authority on the occult. Although his website informs us concerning his academic and military experience, there is nary a word about what exactly makes him an authority on the occult. But hey, we shouldn't expect too much. After all, the 80s was full of self-proclaimed Christian occult experts, and they made a lot of money scaring gullible congregations with bogus information concerning Satanism and witchcraft, so I'm sure Tex fit right in.
Hitler, of course, was a Bohemian.
Sure he was, Tex. Sure.
This guy is fucking crazy.
Then in a time period between the mid-1970s and the early 1990s, scores of reporters attempted to infiltrate the Grove. All attempts were unsuccessful. Grove security identified them, threw them out for trespassing, or in some cases, had the local police arrest them. To many it seemed the Grove's secrets would never become public.
Not true. Rick Kloger, Philip Weiss, and Dirk Matheson were all reporters who successfully infiltrated the Grove during the 80s and early 90s. Kroger and Weiss were never identified, and although Matheson was eventually thrown out, he had already infiltrated the Grove on at least 2 previous occasions without being caught. It's interesting how Jones qualified his statement by beginning in the mid-1970s. Maybe because he knew John Vanderzee successfully infiltrated the Grove in the early 70s and wrote a book about his experiences. He was never caught or thrown out either. Compared to Alex's anemic 4 hours at the Grove, Rick Kroger managed to spend 4 days at the encampment in 1980 with the help of an insider. Philip Weiss infiltrated the Grove in 1989 and spent 60 hours at the encampment over a 7-day period. He took pictures and claimed to have audio recordings as well. Now sure, Jones was the first person to obtain video footage of the cremation ceremony, and for that he gets a gold star. But other than the cremation script, the video itself didn't show us anything we couldn't have found out through books, magazines, or news broadcasts. I mean, the owl statue? We had public knowledge of that. Robed Bohemians? Already public knowledge. A cremation ceremony? Public knowledge. The rest of Jones' video showed him walking down a trail, hitching a ride, walking, looking at a lake, more walking, etc., etc. The bottom line is, whatever secrets the Grove may hold, they are still well hidden despite Alex's videotape.
Before the year 2000 and our successful penetration of the Grove, the mainstream media denied that rituals were indeed taking place there and said that elite from all over the world were simply meeting in secret to have a good time. After the footage we had shot of the cremation of care ritual aired first in England and then in the United States on national TV, the mainstream media changed their tune. The San Francisco Chronicle had previously refused to report on the Grove. After our infiltration, they wrote as many as 5 articles a year, detailing the bizarre activities that were taking place inside the Grove.
No, before the year 2000, there were plenty of mainstream media outlets that reported on the rituals. If you want to go old school, in 1899, the New York Times wrote at least 1 article about the ceremony and how impressive it was. More recently, ABC News did a story on the Grove back in 1981, and Dr. William Dunhoff spoke about the ceremony, the burning of Dull Care, and the giant owl. Jack Anderson wrote a piece in Parade magazine in February of 1981 mentioning the cremation of care, and NBC News with Tom Brokaw ran a story on the Bohemian Grove in 1982 that discussed the retreat, its rituals, and effigy burning. In the same year, a Newsweek story touched on the rituals and called them Kabbalistic. In 1984, ABC reported on the Bohemians' 2-week encampment and the cremation ceremony, and a helicopter hovered above the Grove and filmed footage of the owl statue. Spy Magazine ran an in-depth story on the encampment back in 1989 and discussed the ceremony, while in 1991, Extra published an article on Dirk Matheson and the Bohemian Grove, mentioning the club's mock druidic rituals. Even Jones himself admitted that during his initial research into the Grove, he found out that the Associated Press, Reuters, the Sacramento Bee, and the Washington Times had all confirmed the existence of the giant owl and robed Bohemians at the Grove. So the mainstream media did not deny the cremation of care ritual, and if Jones knows of a mainstream organization that did, well, they were simply uninformed. Jones also claimed the San Francisco Chronicle refused to report on the rituals at the Grove until his expose, but again, his own research staff unintentionally proved this to be a lie. Mike Hanson's Cult of Conspiracy listed at least 4 recent Chronicle stories discussing the Bohemian Grove prior to the year 2000.
Since we blew their cover in 2000, the Grove's gone public to a certain extent. They released this photo of a 1915 ritual. Here you have the hooded figure over the mock sacrifice.
The truth is, scans of the original photo can be found on this Berkeley webpage, and they've been online since at least 1999, 1 year before Jones infiltrated the Grove. I think Alex's narcissism is on full display here. I mean, really, Alex? Do you really think the Bohemian Club is going to react to your expose by releasing pictures of mock sacrifices? If that's the case, they really need to invest in a different PR firm. A couple things I noticed. Jones and the National Geographic are both wrong about the timing. It may be true the photo appeared in a 1915 publication, but the photo is dated 1906. Not exactly sure how the Nat Geo editor missed that one. And if the photo appeared in the National Geographic in 1915, then it obviously was made public 85 years before Jones' infiltration. Also, the magazine claims this picture is of the cremation of care, but that's clearly not the case. The time of day, the setting, the number of people involved, it's all wrong. Even though the giant owl wasn't built until the 1920s, there was no shortage of elaborate set pieces within the grove for their productions. The Times article I mentioned earlier gushed over the cremation spectacle involving 500 participants, electric lights, a full orchestra, a chorus, and that was in 1899. Yeah, the cremation is not what's going on here. It's not commonly known, but before the owl statue, the Bohemian Club built a giant Buddha within the grove. Funny how they're never accused of being closet Buddhists. It's pretty hard to see, but the poster on the tree contains the image and name of a 19th century Spanish-American painter named Javier Timoteo Martinez. I'm sure I butchered the name. Martinez was a very influential artist in California who helped form several art societies in the state, and he became a member of the Bohemian Club in 1897. So, from what I can gather, it looks to me like the men in this picture are paying some sort of homage involving Javier Martinez. A mock sacrifice it is not. Personally, I have a suspicion the man on the ground was a playwright named David Belasco, whose plays heavily influenced the hijinks performances at the Grove in the early 1900s. I can't prove it, he wasn't a Grove member and he may have been in New York at the time, but he was a very respected friend of the original Grove playwriters. He was a San Francisco native, and the Bohemian Club did throw a dinner for him in his honor in 1909. The man in the photo looks strikingly similar to Belasco, but it could just be a coincidence.
You're looking at an illustration from a November 1989 issue of Spy magazine. Spy goes undercover with Henry Kissinger, Merv Griffin, and William F. Buckley Jr. They talk about the incredible security surrounding the Grove.
Jones claims the Spy story talked about incredible security surrounding the Grove. However, Philip Weiss only described those claims in terms of what outsiders speculated about the security. As to what he actually experienced, Weiss clearly stated, but it turned out that Grove security isn't quite what it's reputed to be. Equipped only with conservative recreational gear, a drink, and a newspaper, Weiss was able to come and go as he pleased over the course of 7 days, openly trespassing in what people had thought was an impermeable enclave, and which the press routinely called a heavily guarded area. In reality, there was no barbed wire, no electronic monitoring devices, no patrolling helicopters, none of that. Only a daunting Grove sheriff with a set of checkpoints like the Berlin Wall.
We're from ABC News.
Well, get back there. Get back there.
Can we talk to somebody in the...
Get back there.
But other than the checkpoints, Mr. Weiss's assessment of Grove security was that there was no real security. Well, at least nothing that a reporter dressed in perma-pressed khakis couldn't get past. Now, the reason Jones wanted to paint the Bohemian security as incredible was because it served to make his infiltration of the Grove seem like a much more daring feat than it actually was. Portraying the Bohemian Grove like it was a James Bond villain lair helps build up street cred, I guess.
Historical records are clear from major universities. The Manhattan Project was planned and instituted and run from the Bohemian Club. All of this going on in an atmosphere of bizarre revelry.
In July 1942, there were conferences held at the University of Berkeley in California to discuss the feasibility of a fission bomb. One of the chief researchers, Robert Oppenheimer, worked at Berkeley. Another California meeting was held at the Bohemian Grove in September of that same year, and it included the president of Harvard and representatives of Standard Oil and General Electric, among other notable guests. However, the 2-week encampment that includes the cremation of care ceremony is always held on the second weekend in July. So that means the meeting at the Grove was held 2 months after the bizarre revelry of the encampment had come and gone. Look, the entire project involved at least 20 different locations and 14 states over the course of 4 years. The Bohemian Club may take pride in the fact that their facilities played a part in that process, but the idea that the Manhattan Project was planned, instituted, and run from the club is absurd and couldn't possibly be validated by any historical record.
Nowhere is the origin of the cult more in evidence than in former German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt's own autobiography, Men and Powers, a political retrospective. He talks about how they have their own German groves where they do these rituals, these, quote, druidic rituals. But he says his favorite place to do the rituals is at Bohemian Grove. This is a book that you can get at the library written by him.
Wow, really?
That's incredible.
You got that right, Carl. So Jones found proof that a German chancellor performed druidic rituals at Bohemian Grove? That would be an incredible admission for any former world leader to make.
That's incredible.
Shut up, Carl. Well, here's a copy of Men in Powers, a political retrospective. I bought it from Amazon 6 years ago because the local libraries did not carry it. On pages 224 to 226, Schmidt does mention visiting the Grove on 2 occasions. However, there is absolutely no discussion in the book about German groves or druidic rituals, or performing druid rituals at the Bohemian Grove. Schmidt is completely silent on those matters. Now, you can't simply write this off as an innocent mistake, because Jones had the book in his possession. He went so far as to put the druidic rituals in quotes, and he included photo stills of the book in his Dark Secrets, Martial Law, and Order of Death videos, complete with underlined passages in order to show just how thorough he had been in studying it. Of course, none of the pages he highlighted contained the coveted references to druidic rituals or German groves, and that's because they don't exist. The funny thing is, in Dark Secrets, Jones discussed the book, but he said nothing about Schmidt performing rituals. He only mentioned how the Chancellor's enjoyment of the Grove grew in subsequent visits. But I guess at some point Jones figured that wasn't a big enough bombshell, because 5 years later in Martial Law, he suddenly claimed Schmidt's book discussed German groves and druid rituals, ideas that were completely absent in his earlier video.
And now for something completely different.
Agency was to crash plane on 911. In what the CIA describes as bizarre coincidence, the U.S. intelligence agency was planning an exercise on September 11th, 2001, in which an hijacked jet aircraft is flown into the World Trade Center. Ladies and gentlemen, again, agency was to crash plane on 911. Here's another AP article. Agency planned exercise on September 11th, built around a plane crashing into a building. That's right. It says right outside D.C. at the CIA headquarters, they were running an exercise of flying jet aircraft into buildings.
The National Reconnaissance Office in Chantilly, Virginia, which is not the CIA's headquarters, was certainly using the scenario of a small jet crashing into their facility as a template for the exercise. Their office is located only 4 miles from Dulles International Airport, and the building complex is in the flight path of this runway, so I can understand their concern. However, the headline is very misleading. The NRO wasn't crashing an actual plane. The exercise pertained solely to evacuation and disaster response by NRO employees on the ground. The jet aircraft itself was completely imaginary. Essentially, the entire exercise was a large-scale fire drill meant to help employees locate alternate routes of escape in case the exits were inaccessible due to a plane crash. No aircraft were involved, and neither NORAD nor the FAA played any part in the exercise. The NRO could just as easily have replaced small jet with Mothra in its description, and the drill would have proceeded precisely the same way. The article also said that once news of the real-world events reached them, they canceled the exercise. Jones mentions 2 AP articles here, but they're actually the same article written by reporter John J. Lumpkin, just using 2 different headlines. Note that Jones claimed the exercise involved the World Trade Center. Lumpkin doesn't say anything like that. Just follow along as Alex reads.
The U.S. intelligence agency was planning an exercise on September 11th, 2001, in which an...
Okay, stop. At this point, Jones hesitates. Why? Well, instead of reading an errant aircraft would crash into one of its buildings, as the article says, he goes off script to say hijacked jet aircraft flew into the World Trade Center. Listen to it all together and you'll see what I'm talking about.
The U.S. intelligence agency was planning an exercise on September 11th, 2001, in which an hijacked jet aircraft is flown into the World Trade Center.
The frustrating thing is, like the Helmut Schmidt autobiography, Jones thinks that if he holds up AP printouts for his audience to see, they will believe he is accurately reporting what was written, even though he's not. And this is ultimately my problem with Alex Jones, his tendency to distort, exaggerate, or even lie in order to get his message across. As much as he enjoys questioning the honesty of the mainstream media, it's ridiculous that Jones would end up committing the kind of journalistic sins he accuses other media outlets of committing. If Alex Jones wants to make a career out of shining a spotlight on government corruption, he's more than welcome to do that. But if what he is saying is true, then let the facts stand on their own merit. If he has to lie in order to make his point, then there might be something fundamentally wrong with it. Hey, wait a minute. Was that an owl?
The CIA-controlled drills that morning confused NORAD for over an hour until it was almost too late for them to shoot down the hijacked planes.
The USA Today article states from the beginning that NORAD held the drill 2 years before 9/11, not weeks, as Jones claimed. The ABC News clip he used a few minutes later in the video even confirms this.
USA Today reports that in the 2 years before the attacks on September the 11th, NORAD conducted exercises using hijacked airliners as weapons. And one target was the World Trade Center.
So either Alex Jones has extremely poor reading comprehension skills, or he intentionally misreported the USA Today article.
Seymour Hersh first broke the story at the New Yorker magazine about the airlift of evil. It was then picked up by major publications, but, well, forgotten into the memory hole. At the end of the 3-week-long Afghan war in Afghanistan, 8,000 Taliban and al-Qaeda leaders were loaded on U.S. government C-130s and flown out to Pakistan to safety.
The MSNBC story said the planes were Pakistani, not U.S. government C-130s. According to The Guardian, the U.S. military cooperation in the airlifts only involved establishing a special air corridor to guarantee that the rescue flights could proceed safely. None of Jones' sources claimed the evacuees were loaded onto U.S. government planes and flown anywhere. The New Yorker also clarified that the exodus of Pakistani military personnel included an unknown number of Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters. The Guardian article put the number of Pakistani evacuees around 5,000, and it was not known how many of the military evacuees were Taliban or al-Qaeda. The only thing that came close to Jones's claim was a statement from a CIA analyst interviewed in the New Yorker article who said many of the people they spirited away were the Taliban leadership. According to The Guardian, the U.S. allowed Pakistan's military officials to be flown to safety in order to preserve the political standing of General Pervez Musharraf. However, Alex Jones bumped the number of evacuees from 5,000 up to 8,000 for no justifiable reason. And he insisted that instead of being mostly Pakistani military personnel, he claimed they were all Taliban and al-Qaeda leaders, when none of his sources supported that claim. And just to confirm this wasn't a mere slip of the tongue, he doubled down and repeated it again about a minute later in the video.
Yes, 8,000 Taliban and al-Qaeda cream the leaders being flown out to safety.
The next morning, Mike went to pray in the local church. I met him some hours later at a park down the road.
I've heard these stories for years being in the Patriot community, and it's true.
What's true?
They sacrificed something to an owl god, is what I got out of it.
But weren't they just sacrificing all the troubles in the world for a 2-week holiday?
That's not what I got out of it.
But wasn't it just a metaphor?
To me, it doesn't matter.
I think that pretty much sums up the mindset of Mike Hansen and Alex Jones. It doesn't matter what they see, all that matters is what they get out of it. And of course, what they get out of it is based entirely on all of the many presuppositions they had going into it in the first place. I have to admit, I think Alex Jones believes in what he's doing, but I also think he is willing to do and say whatever it takes in order to propagate his point of view. And if that means sacrificing honesty on the altar at times, well, so be it. It's for the greater good, right?
But I'm completely non-violent when it comes to just going out there and trying to get the information. That's what I'm trying to do.
I'm going to cram a gun in their mouth and see how they like it, because I'm free!
you know, he's not dangerous. But it's a difference between being dangerous and protecting your freedom.
That's been in my family history to fight. When I see a whole bunch of dog turds being laid all over the society, I don't run around stomping on them because I don't want to get it on my feet. I say to the general public, let's clean these up. Because some of us are willing to spill our blood with a sacrifice. You hear me, scum? We're coming for you.
Don't propagate your hate.